Singapore has blocked 10 websites linked to foreign actors that could spread harmful information. And this action, taken by the Media Authority, labels the sites inauthentic, making them unavailable to users in Singapore. Since the current foreign interference law FICA doesn't cover these sites, the government plans to review the law for updates. Sabrina Ng reports.
To an untrained eye, these 10 websites appear similar to other news sites about Singapore. By mixing familiar landmarks with local stories, they pose as legitimate Singaporean sources. Some use domain names closely resembling real ones, making their content feel local. It could easily mislead people into thinking they're reading official views or local opinions. On top of that, many of these fake sites feature AI-generated content derived from articles published by local mainstream media, further blurring the lines between what is real and what is not. Authorities say these tactics are typical of malicious foreign actors. The aim is to manipulate public perception by creating websites that appeal to a local audience. Once these sites gain a local following, they can then be used as platforms to launch hostile information campaigns. For instance, by disseminating falsehoods about Singapore, inciting social tensions, and undermining trust and confidence in public institutions. Who's behind these sites? The Home Affairs Ministry says many are linked to global networks of inauthentic domains that are under the radar of cybersecurity researchers. While MHA didn't name the state actors, researchers have linked them to campaigns from Russia and China. Of the 10 sites, CPR Wire and Times News Wire, two press release distribution entities, are frequently cited as sources. Their content is nearly identical. A digital threat research group recently reported that Times News Wire has played a key role in a China-based influence campaign. A cybersecurity firm noted that content on Times Newswire resembles the high-energy influence operation, which used the Chinese PR firm Shanghai Haishun Technology to host and distribute material. An analyst notes that the legitimacy of these firms makes them more dangerous, especially when they operate in a network.
These networks have been used for foreign influence campaigns overseas. So if we put two and two together, we then realize that anybody can easily make use of these services, of these companies, of these networks, to do the same thing to Singapore, whether it's to run a scam or to run a political campaign or something during a time when it's politically sensitive, to send in some messages that are going to be detrimental to us.
MHA states that while the sites haven't been used for hostile information campaigns, preemptive action is necessary. The ministry urges Singaporeans to stay vigilant and be aware of the risks posed by these deceptive sites.
And for more analysis, we're now joined by Dr. Shashi Jayakumar, Executive Director of SJK Geostrategic Advisory. Dr. Jayakumar, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now, at what point do websites like the ones we just heard about turn hostile?
Well, firstly, thanks very much for having me. I think we need to understand at the basic point that these are our assets, which are currently, from what I see, trying to build a legend, meaning slowly trying to build some semblance of credibility and cover in a legitimate seeming but actually insidious way. So people, maybe even some Singaporeans, start to think these are legit news sources, maybe these can be trusted and so on. They might even think eventually that, wow, this is on par with CNA or Straits Times or The Wire. So like we have already heard, when there's a serious potential downturn in relations with another country or a serious blip in geopolitical issues, which necessitates further conditioning of third parties, including states, including potentially us, then the conditioning through these sorts of deceptive websites can be ramped up. So it hasn't happened yet, but in some, I think it could have happened in the not too distant future.
The names of these websites, though, they're quite interesting. DaoBaoDaily.com, LionCityLive.com, SingaporeNow.com. These are just some of the few. What do the choice of names for the spoof sites suggest about these foreign actors' intent, and does it help to further their cause?
It's quite interesting and telling, and not simply a cause for mirth, because I think these websites and the actors, the adversaries behind them, were very deliberate and intentional in the choices of Zabao Daily and also Alamak, .io. And partly, I think, to give a sense that they are of us, among us, they are very, very local. This is the impression they are trying to convey, very, very legit, relying, I think, more than anything else on human psychology and the cognitive process of individuals. Because when going into sites like this, unless we are very, very discerning or skeptical, we tend to let our guard down. So these are preemptive nodes. But look at some of the institutions. Singapore Newtown Association suggesting doing good works within Singapore, good leaders, when these institutions and individuals may not actually exist in the first place. If we're not careful, we may actually think that these are legitimate and bona fide.
At this point, as we understand, the level of exposure of Singaporeans to these websites is low. Hostile information has not been detected yet with the websites. How do you balance preemptive actions, though, to safeguard security while not sparking off even more interest in these sites?
I tend to agree up to a point. It is probably factually true that there is no real evidence that the hostile information campaign aspect had yet been ramped up in a way which specifically tried to target Singaporeans. And I agree that there doesn't seem to have been a great deal of local interest yet. These have been taken down, but if you have a little bit of knowledge as an interested individual, of course, you can try to do workarounds and get to the websites. But the fact that they have been exposed, I think that's really the difference. I don't think the government can take action against all. There are many websites, but really in its actions today, I think there's some sense of the government and through its agencies showing that we are aware and that government is therefore prepared to take action more than anything else to show not just the potential adversary, as the case may be, but show the people that we do have levers at the disposal of state agencies.
How are you assessing today's security landscape, Dr. Jayakumar? Are you seeing an increasing trend in foreign interference and hostile websites targeting Singapore specifically? And what sort of implications does this have for how we negotiate bilateral relationships with other countries?
Absolutely. If you look at the dawn, if you like, of the organized study of these sorts of issues, let's say allegations concerning Russian interference in the 2016 US election, if you recall those days, that almost seems to be prehistory. Now you fast forward all these years later, there's state actors going around doing nasty things through networks and means, including AI, generative AI, which didn't exist in those days, and using these tools synergistically, if you like, with cyber offensive operations. And I mentioned this last point because within the offensive arsenal, if you like, state agencies and state operatives often use these tools synergistically. My point, of course, is that we are price takers in these matters. We are a small nation state. We have clearly chosen and made this choice not to loudly attribute whoever the state actor or the adversary may be. But every once in a while, clearly, the calculation has been made that we have to take action to show others that they are noticed, that we notice these things. And also, I think, to give Singaporeans some sense that through the good investigative work done by agencies, efforts are being made to protect us.
And the recent takedown of these websites was conducted under the Broadcasting Act rather than FICA. Is the issue of foreign interference serious enough to necessitate changes in our laws? And are there loopholes that the government needs to address at this point?
The way I would look at it is this, actually. We've seen a lot of laws, actually, which are specifically tailored to protect us from foreign disinformation or foreign interference. There's POFMA and there's FICA as well. Besides that, there's the Broadcasting Act. And on a slightly separate plane, there's the Online Criminal Harms Act. You put all this together, it's a fairly impressive arsenal. But as was said by key officials, including Minister Shanmugam, the Law and Home Affairs Minister, he said when FICA was unveiled, he did say that there are other laws like the Broadcasting Act, which actually give agencies more powers. In other words, he's saying, if I understand correctly, that laws like FICA are actually precisely and narrowly tailored. So as a result of what has happened, I think we're now getting broad hints that there might be refinements to FICA. And I think this is the way the government thinks. It's quite unafraid to look at, refine, and construct an architecture which is applicable to Singapore, which protects Singapore. I think it's worth remarking on this because if you recall, when POFMA and FICA were unveiled, Singapore came in for a fair bit of criticism, I think it is fair to say, especially from the West. But now if you look at how others, including the Western Hemisphere, are trying to protect themselves, inoculate themselves, they're actually looking at Singapore very, very closely. And in certain respects, going far beyond punitively what Singapore has done. And that's worth making note of.
All right, Dr. Jayakumar, appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for speaking with us. That was Dr. Shashi Jayakumar, Executive Director of SJK Geostrategic Advisory.